Welcome back. We're going to draw a self-portrait drawing by this woman, Minerva Chapman. This is not the drawing that we're going to copy. Born in 1858, American painter who I honestly didn't hear about until today. She was born in New York State, moved to Chicago where she grew up, and then lived most of her adult life in Paris. Studied at Mount Holyoke, and she was also the first woman president of the International Art Union. Obviously very successful. This is a lovely example of her painting. Obviously a narrative painting. Very simple slice of life. And the drawing that we're going to copy is another self-portrait. It is this one. This is a very, what I would call a very tonal kind of drawing. It's, I don't see a lot of hatching, so we're going to do our shading with the side of the pencil. If you have paper that has more of a rough texture, that would be more appropriate for this, but not essential. We can learn everything we need to learn about this by just using the paper and pencil that we have. So to begin with, we're going to do our normal routine of the Loomis head. I hope this is helping. So there's the ball of the head. Here's the side plane. This is a very, not a tilted pose like we've been doing. It's very frontal. Here's her hairline, which is clear as day. Her brow line. And this would be the bottom of the nose. And the rest of the face is going to come down like this. Remember not to make any of these lines dark, because you'll just have to erase them later. And one of the reasons we're doing this is because I would like you to start thinking about doing your own self-portraits in the mirror. So even at this really rough stage, we can see there's a lot of sort of height to her head. So I'm going to block in that hairdo. And I want to try to get these big shapes in my drawing to look something like the big shapes on her head. Including this slightly clownish collar. And I'm going to take this block in phase a little further than I normally take it. See this angular movement here? And why don't we try that thing of just looking for some parallel constructions here. You see this angle, we could relate that to this angle way over here. And this angle at the back of the neck. And what am I missing here? This one under the brow. And this one under the hairline. And again, this just is going to help us start to find relationships that are a little bit further away from each other and just see this in a slightly different way. So try to block in these parallels. And I'm going to change colors over here if I can. Maybe I can't. Guess not. But we're going to find another angle. Let's look at this one. See the bridge of the nose there? That's pretty close to... not a whole lot. Okay, maybe I'll take that one out. And let's see. Front of the ear and this lower part of the nose are parallel. And this shadow edge, see that? I don't know if this is going to be incredibly useful, but... and this forehead. So let's try that. So we've got this here, and this over here, which is really sort of a plane change from the front of the head to the side of the head. And the front of the ear, which kind of relates to this one. And I'm sure I'm missing a bunch, but that's all we're going to do. Say goodbye to that. And time to zoom in a little. So, if we measure one thing at all, this whole drawing, we might want to measure the bridge of the nose. So, I'm going to mark the bridge of the nose. Here's the center of the bridge of the nose. And this is the eye line. It's just below the brow line. So, remember, this is our brow line. So our eye line's going to be here. And this is the front of the ear, so the back of the ear would be here. And what we're looking for is where to place the bridge of the nose on that line. And if I measure, it seems to be just about a quarter of the way over. So if we go a quarter of the way between here and here, and we can always check that with a piece of scrap paper, which I encourage you to do. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So the bridge of the nose, we're going to build it right around there. before I shadow map, I'm just going to block a few of these things in. So here was that angle. The tip of the nose, it was the same as this angle, the ear. Remember that? I think I forgot to draw it. And the mouth is a third of the way down. And her chin's a little further down than I said. Now the thing I want you to really focus on today is try not to be any more definite in these features than she's being. See how kind of fuzzy everything is? We're gonna aspire to create the same level of fuzziness in our drawings. So I tried to get into this without the shadow map first, and I'm feeling a little bit lost. Pretty eager to put those shadow shapes in, so I'm going to do that right now. And why don't I outline them for you after I get my dog to shut up. So we have shadow shape. I'm just going to draw these. This is all in shadow, even the white of the eye is in shadow. This is all in shadow. This is in shadow. This is in shadow. Why is it so light right there? Reflected light from that kind of clown collar. And there's, I'm going to call this a little bit a shadow too, kind of going into halftone. Okay. So I'm using the side of my pencil, like I said. This drawing is not about hatching direction. That's what I mean when I say it's tonal. And if you can get the right pattern of lights and darks, you're 90% of the way there. See how easy that is and how much better it looks? The drawing is now easy to read. Before it was hard to read. Not quite done. I've got to do this shadow, shape, and I really should have shadow mapped the hair too, because that's very clearly mapped by her. I know some of the feedback I've been giving recently has mentioned sort of flatness in the hair. And that's because it's harder to see shadows in here, so people just sort of shade it all in the same, which is not generally a good idea. Okay, and I missed this little shadow shape under the ear. Okay. Feel free to do what I'm doing right now, which is I'm adding to my shadow shapes, and I'm erasing my shadow shapes. I'm going to keep pushing and pulling those shapes until the patterns don't match exactly, but they have to remind me of each other. It should even start to look a little bit like her. Okay. Now I'm just going to go a step darker where my irises are. Notice that I'm not drawing little circles, I'm just doing my first shading direction. And just sort of seeing if I can get a little bit of a sense of the gaze. And there she is, looking right at us, but not quite. See the eyes? This eye is pulled way to the left compared to this one. They're not focused. That's slightly wall-eyed, which is the opposite of cross-eyed. So, get rid of this stuff. And now let's see if we can make this look more like her. I'm going to begin by getting more specific with the bridge of the nose. See that direction change there that we noticed earlier? But I'm still using a very light pressure. Do not start bearing down yet. Not a good idea. Notice the tip of the nose has a shadow under it. There's a little shadow around the nostril. And I need to get a little more height into the ala here. And very, very light pressure to create some of these halftones that define the top of the ala and even define the right side of the bridge of the nose. If we zoom in on this, we can see that she seems to have done a little bit of poking around, trying to find these outlines. And I'm feeling like I put my owl a little too far back. So I'm just gonna scoot that forward a tiny bit. So coming up into here, when zoomed in the way we are, we can really see just how little definition there is around that eye. And again, I do not want to see you guys adding detail to your drawing that you can't see in the thing we're copying. So I want you to be able to see what I'm doing a little better. So I'm just going to move my camera down a little closer to the drawing. There we go. I mean, what you really need to look at is not what I'm doing so much as the original, but hopefully it helps a little to watch me do it. So I do have enough texture on my paper to see what's happening. If I just shade lightly, I get that texture of the paper starts to become visible. And it gives you the pattern of light and dark that is similar to the pattern you get with hatching, but more random and natural, since it's just formed by the pulp of the paper. So some of these original construction lines are really looking bad right now, so I'm going to get rid of those. Maybe zoom out a little. And look at how soft this contour is. The side of the cheekbone. And it's dark against light, so our tendency is going to be to just make that really sharp. Why wouldn't we? If you think about it, though, having a sharp contour there would make that contour lift forward visually. And what she wants to do is to get that cheekbone to recede into the distance. Make it look visibly further back than the tip of the nose, which she made relatively sharp. And it's just a little trick, really, but by making it slightly out of focus, that's what happens. That's a stylistic choice, just the same way one photographer might like big areas of the picture to be out of focus, and another photographer would want the whole thing to be in focus. There's not a right or a wrong way to do it, but it's a trick you should know how to use. So can we see a pupil here? Just a little. We definitely see the shadow under the lid. We definitely cannot see an eyelid. Notice we can't see a corner of the eye on the right here. It just kind of hooks around. We do see a little bit of shadow under the eyelid here. And this dark is just sort of, this whole eye is just buried in dark. Look at the subtlety of this little plane change here between the eye socket and then under the cheekbone. You can just sort of feel that stretching across. And I would say the answer is yes, we can see a little darkening where the pupil is, so I'm just going to press a little harder, but I don't want it to be in focus. Okay, coming back to this ala that was giving me trouble before. Notice that the very back of it has a little halftone. And then there is a shadow shape to the left of it. That was an actual small shadow shape. Halftones along here to define the bridge of the nose a little better. And I guess we'll do the other eye while we're over here. Which I feel like, remember my ala was too far over. And this eye might be also, this eye feels like it's pulling a little bit to the left. So as I go in and darken it, I'm going to pull that inside corner in a little closer to the, remember we usually relate this inside corner of the eye to the ala. So when my ala drifted left, so did my eye. So I'm just going to bump this shadow shape just a tiny bit to the right. See how easy that was? And you see how important it is not to just go in and do everything in detail one step at a time, because then you're not going to want to make these little important position changes. Now this eye, when you look at it, is really remarkable because there's no detail here. However, even with everything out of focus, this tiny little drawing, we can see very clearly the highlight and the darkening of the pupil, and even that light shining into the bottom of the iris. Can you see that? So the iris gets really dark up at the top. The white of the eye is really dark over here in the corner. But there's just that little subtle bit of lightening in the bottom of the iris, which is actually lighter here than most of the white of the eye. Most of the white is in shadow. It's really an amazingly lifelike effect. And it's done with such economy. And if that's not a word that you've heard much used in relation to art, you should know what it means. It just means doing a lot with a little. Which is always our goal. I keep losing that little highlight. And then I put it back, and then it's too obvious. I think that's the right idea. So notice this shadow of the lid comes down past the eye. There's this clear little halftone under the inside of the eye socket here. And a shadow under the brow ridge and the orbit of the eye, and a little darkening right here, which shows the reflected light right above the eye. But not everywhere. There's no reflected light through here. It's just dark. And then this shadow comes in closer to the bridge of the nose. Where are her eyebrows, you're asking? It's really, again, very subtly drawn. It's really humbling when you see these artists who you've never heard of who can do what you don't know how to do. There's so much to learn in copying. Okay, we're gonna scoot down now towards the mouth. Just gonna do this a little bit more with this halftone. And I think it'd be useful to zoom out for a minute, see if we're on the right track at all. More or less. I feel like this tip of the nose drops down a little further past the nostril. Okay, now for the mouth. So, see how much space I have between here and here? That's obviously an error. So, what do? This shadow below the nose is quite a bit longer. And that's why my nose was looking a little bit flat. Didn't have enough shadow under it. Remember, big things cast long shadows. And I still have a little too much space, so that means the upper lip needs to come up a little higher. And once I have that nailed in, or nailed down, or whatever, I can have a much better idea where to put the line between the lips, which is one of the most definite features in this very kind of soft focus drawing. And the cast shadow under that line. And look what happens to it over here. It's barely there, it's very short, and it just disappears. Turns that corner and just fades away. Which is very similar to the strategy of leaving this cheekbone fuzzy. Right? Things that we want to push them back in space, we're not going to give them as much definition. You got to understand this is all about making intelligent choices. It's not about just drawing what is in front of you like a machine. So just by way of contrast, I keep talking about the sort of choices that this artist is making and the amount of things that she's leaving out. Just to show you what happens when you don't make choices like that. This is an artist named, by an artist named Paul Cadden. And this is what's called hyperrealism. And a lot of realism in art today is more like this. It's like copying all the information that's given by a photograph. And there aren't as many choices being made. There's not as much skill being evidenced. Anybody with a little training and a lot of patience and a really big photograph to work from can get these kinds of effects. You may or may not like the design. It may have other things going for it. But the thing is, there's no style. There's no editorial decision making going on. What we're looking at today, though, is so much simpler and so much more advanced, I think. It takes more skill to know how to make these kinds of choices effectively. So, I keep telling you not to outline the lips, and look at this. It's barely there, that lower lip, just like it looks like. Just barely touched the paper. But this is definite shadow shape. And notice that I'm running out of room for this shadow shape. My lower lip looks a little thin. So I need to just expand that a little. And again, look at the subtlety here. There's a little core shadow right where this shadow of the chin meets the light. And this shadow shape angles up towards the corner of the mouth a little. And here again is one of the more definite lines in the whole drawing. It's this outside edge of the chin. And I'm going to have to tuck this back a little. Gave her a little too much second chin there. And we can see just a little bit of hatching along here. It's such an obvious place to do some contour hatching, curving around the throat, that you can definitely see that she's leaning on that device a little bit, very subtly. So something feels off to me over here. I feel like this cheekbone is coming out a little too far, because it shouldn't come out as far as the brow ridge. So I'm going to just cheat that back a little. That's a little better. And I just need to unify the shadow area over here. She's not a young woman in this picture. I'm not a young man. If I was going to draw myself, I should probably ought to try to do something soft focus like this. She's even like very subtly indicated this little kind of mole or something right there. Can you see it? Which is just a little hatched cast shadow there, and then a little halftone all around it. And the halftone makes the light kind of pop on that thing. And these halftones, when I say halftones, I hope everyone knows what I'm talking about. It's not a shadow, it's just an area in the light that's a little darker. Moving towards shadow, but it's still getting light. So you see how this cheekbone halftone really defines the side plane of the face. Okay. Sorry, I'm jumping around right now. So the lower lip on the shadow side is much darker than I drew it. But look at that reflected light kind of bleeding in from behind her. We're going to get that effect by darkening almost to the edge, but not quite. See that? Okay, time to zoom out a little more. I feel like this line needs to come down a little further. What I'm looking at right now is I'm trying to connect this to this. Do I have too much space here? I'm wondering. I think it's about right, but because this is that halftone along the side of the plane change of the forehead. See that? But it's feeling to me like I just have a little too much space across here. And if you remember, I tucked the ala slightly to the right. I brought this eye slightly to the right. And I'm predictably going to have to end up bringing the ear slightly to the right. Which is why we never do the ear details in the beginning. Again, look at the economy of the ear. Contrast it with the drawing of the water pouring down the man's face. But this feels totally like an ear. We can even read, see there's a little coarse shadow near the bottom of the earlobe, which makes a little reflected light, so that the bottom of the ear turns under convincingly. Notice that we get really dark up in here inside the helix. And let's back out just a little more. You can really see what we're doing now. And notice when we were zoomed in, we couldn't even really see the eyebrows. They're that subtle. But there's this subtle darkening along here, which really contributes to her kind of quizzical expression. And a lovely kind of roundness to the forehead. Remember at the beginning we were blocking all that stuff in with straight lines. Now we're starting to enjoy the way things curve this way and that. She's even got a little kind of double chin crease here. Kind of ballsy move in a self-portrait. To be this honest with yourself and obviously still this kind of pleased with yourself. She seems really kind of happy, which I find wonderful. And we can even, now that we're zoomed out, all of a sudden I can see this little changes of this eyebrow, which I really couldn't see when I was close in. And these little furrows here, she's doing a little knitting her brows slightly, and these little tiny halftones above the inside corners of the eye, and even these subtle creases in her forehead. Again, barely there. I'm going to zoom in and see. What does that look like close up, I wonder? I mean, look at that. It's just like so legible when you're zoomed out, and when you're zoomed in, you're like, what am I even looking at? When you look at a masterpiece, though, you should never think, I don't know how she had enough patience to do that. That's not the point. It takes patience to, weave an oriental rug. It should not take patience to draw a masterpiece. If anything, she looks a little impatient. Looks like she's ready to get up and do something else. And that's how it should look. So notice I'm using the side of my pencil again. And we marked where those darks were. remember I was saying in the shadow side of her cheek, we can see the texture of the paper, and it's giving us those nuances of light, a little bit of white paper showing through. We don't see that on the shadow side of the hair. She wants to create more of a jet black. So what she's done is she's put some in and smudged it down. And see what that does? That just knocks out the white paper bits. So they're gone, and it gives you another step of darkness. And I'm not using my finger. You can, but it's better to use a little blending stump, or this is just a piece of paper towel, which is just as good if you're doing a loose kind of blending like this. And now in the light areas, she's shaded it, but we can see the texture of the paper. We can see those little bits of white coming through. So, and I can also see up here that she's probably right-handed, because I'm seeing her shading direction here again, because she was impatient to get that part done. And now when I go shade a step darker on these smudged areas, it's going to look darker still because I smudged first. I don't necessarily have to go back and smudge it again, because the white of the paper is already gone. You see that? So now that I have most of the darks in the hair, I want to go reassess the overall shape of the hair, and I can see that I need a little more sticking out over here on this side. I'm frankly just not used to seeing hairdos like this in the 21st century, so I think I flattened it out a little. Got some serious volume. And look at this lovely little, see that little reflected light under the hair? Always try to think of the hair as a volume, not as a bunch of hairs. Think of it the way a sculptor would. The only hairs we can actually see is like this one and that one. They're important though. They sort of make all the rest of it believable. The other thing that great drawing should do is you should feel like you, when you study it, and especially when you copy it, you should feel like you're getting to know this person a little bit. And that's really probably the most important quality of any art is, that's why we call it self-expression, right? It's like, who am I? I'm going to show you a little bit through this work of art. And that's what's missing in the photorealism. You know, like the people that just copy photographs precisely. You can look at the work of 10 different artists in that vein and you can't tell the work apart. If it's, some of the drawings are good, but only because they are drawn from good photographs. But the fact that they got turned into drawings, it's technically interesting, but it's not artistically interesting because there's nothing in the drawing that's different from what was in the photograph to begin with. So, why is this all fuzzy? Well, she's leading your eye right into her features, for one thing. And for another, she wants it to recede again. She doesn't want it to jump out in front, even though this is physically in front a little. She doesn't want that to compete with her. So I'm having to make the collar a little bigger. And what I'm going to do now is I notice that her darks overall are a step darker than mine. I think it's because it's charcoal. And I'm just limiting myself to this lousy number 2 pencil today, but I'm just going to go just unify my darks and pull everything just a little towards black. See, I'm just going to unify this whole side of the face. The whole thing is flatter in her drawing than it is in mine. And that whole top of the ear is slightly in shadow. I kind of missed that. So yeah, right now, I don't want to bring this boundary out between the chin and the collar. And neither did she, so I'm doing what she did. I'm just shading right across it. Just like I'm shading right through all this detail. darker on this cast shadow under the line between the lips, a little darker on this upper lip. And this is all fine tuning. And your drawing's going to need different corrections than mine does, but hopefully you're willing to take a little while at the end of the journey and just be honest with yourself about what you missed and what you can still improve. And I'm going to call it a day right there. So, thank you for watching and drawing, and I look forward to seeing what you did.